You're listening to The Observing Eye. Pirate radio for the mind. Coming at you fresh from the computer hell cabin.
Hello, you beautiful lot. It is Sunday, the new day of the podcast, Sunday, the 29th of September, 2024, and you're listening to episode 84 of The Observing Eye, coming at you live from the computer hell cabin. Every week we get psychological, philosophical, and all manner of introspective. I'm David, and this week we're talking about narcissism. Not the fable of Narcissus, cursed by Echo to gaze into the pool until he succumbed to starvation, see episode 83. I mean those damaged pains in the arses that we sometimes stumble across in life. Now, of course, when I say narcissist, I'm not just talking about someone who's a bit full of themselves or loves the spotlight a little too much. I mean the kind of person whose behavior over time can drain you emotionally, confuse you, and make you doubt your own reality. If you've ever felt manipulated, controlled, or as though your needs are always secondary to someone else's, well, then you may have just encountered a narcissist. Like a hungry ghost. Now, this isn't about pointing fingers or labeling people too quickly. It is about understanding the very real dynamics that come with living, working, or being in a relationship with someone who has narcissistic traits, or even full-blown narcissistic personality disorder. There's a mouthful. What's key here is knowing how to protect your own mental health, set boundaries, and navigate these challenging relationships in a way that allows you to stay grounded. In today's episode, we're going to explore the nature of narcissism, the emotional toll it can take on those around it, and most importantly, the strategies you can use to emotionally survive when someone in your life exhibits these traits. I'll be covering a lot of ground today. We'll talk about what exactly narcissism is, how it develops, and why some people exhibit these behaviors. We'll also dive into the real-world effects of being close to a narcissist, whether they're your partner, your boss, or even a family member. And of course, I'll give you some practical tools for setting boundaries, managing conflict, and caring for your emotional health in the face of narcissistic behavior. Now, I appreciate this is a heavy topic and it's one that affects people deeply. Maybe you're in a relationship with a narcissist right now. Run! Or perhaps you've dealt with one in the past. Whatever your experience, my hope is that by the end of this episode, you'll feel empowered with knowledge and ready to approach this kind of relationship from a place of strength and clarity. Okay, let's dive in. Alright, let's get into it then. I want to start by unpacking what narcissism really is. It's one of those terms that gets tossed around a lot, and sometimes I feel a little bit too casually. You know, you'll hear someone say, oh, my ex was such a narcissist, or my boss is a total narcissist. But what does that actually mean? And how do we distinguish someone who's just self-centered from someone who may be exhibiting narcissistic traits in a more harmful way? So let's start with a basic definition. In psychology, narcissism refers to a personality trait characterized by an inflated sense of self-importance, a deep need for admiration, and often a lack of empathy for others. That said, narcissism can exist on a spectrum. On one end, you have healthy narcissism, which is essentially just confidence or self-assurance. And let's be honest, we all need a little bit of that to survive in the world. We've got to believe in ourselves, right? But on the other end of the spectrum, narcissism can become pathological. This is where it crosses into narcissistic personality disorder, or NPD, which is a more extreme, rigid, and often destructive form of narcissism. People with NPD tend to exhibit persistent patterns of grandiosity, a constant need for attention, and an inability to see others as fully realized individuals with their own needs and feelings. They often view people as tools or extensions of themselves, and this is where things get tricky in relationships, whether it's romantic, familial, or professional. Now, I want to be clear here. Not everyone with narcissistic traits has NPD, and we should avoid diagnosing people ourselves. But what we can do is recognize patterns of narcissistic behavior that might be affecting us so we can respond in healthier ways. So where does all of this come from? How does someone develop narcissistic traits or even full-blown NPD? Well, psychology tells us that narcissism often has its roots in early childhood experiences. A lot of research points to either overindulgence or extreme neglect as potential causes. Let me explain. In some cases, if a child is overly pampered, constantly praised without any constructive criticism, they might develop an unrealistic sense of their own importance. They grow up thinking the world revolves around them, and when reality doesn't match up to those expectations, they struggle. They can't handle criticism or failure because they've never been taught how to deal with it in a healthy way. On the flip side, narcissism can also develop out of emotional neglect. Imagine a child who never feels truly seen or valued by their caregivers. They may cope by creating a grandiose self-image to compensate for the lack of love and attention they received. This can lead to a kind of emotional armor, where they overcompensate with an inflated sense of self because deep down they fear they're unworthy. And of course, there's the cultural aspect. We live in a time where social media, celebrity culture, and the obsession with likes and followers can exacerbate narcissistic tendencies. People, especially younger generations, are being conditioned to present their best selves online, to curate their image. This constant need for validation can feed narcissistic traits, even in those who might not have developed them in other circumstances. But here's an important point. Narcissism, especially at the more extreme end, isn't just about self-confidence or even arrogance. It's about a lack of empathy. That's the real key here. A narcissist struggles or outright refuses to see other people as real, autonomous individuals with their own valid feelings and needs. This is what makes being in a relationship with a narcissist so draining, so confusing, and often so painful. Their world revolves around them, and they expect yours too as well. So let's look at some key characteristics that often define narcissistic behavior. You've probably heard of the grandiose narcissist, the person who's always bragging, always needs to be the center of attention, who believes they're superior to others. This is the type most of us think of when we hear the word narcissist. They come across as confident, even charismatic, but underneath that charm is usually a deep insecurity. Their sense of self-worth is often so fragile that they need constant validation from the people around them. And if they don't get it, they can become very angry very quickly. Then there's the more vulnerable or covert narcissist. This type might not be as obvious. They may seem shy, even insecure on the surface, but they still have the same sense of entitlement and need for validation. They often play the victim to get sympathy or attention, using emotional manipulation rather than outright aggression to control those around them. So where does this leave us? If you're living with or closely involved with a narcissist, you've probably experienced these behaviors firsthand. Maybe it started out with charm and flattery, what we often call love bombing in romantic relationships. But over time, that gave way to manipulation, blame shifting, and control. You may have noticed how they tend to make everything about them, how they struggle to acknowledge your needs or feelings, and how they react with anger or defensiveness when you try to set boundaries or bring up any criticism. Living with or being in close proximity to a narcissist often means you're walking on eggshells. You learn to suppress your own needs to avoid conflict. You might even start questioning your own reality, which is where gaslighting comes into play, a tactic narcissists frequently use to keep you off balance. They'll deny things they've said or done, twist situations, and make you feel like you're the one in the wrong. This is why narcissistic relationships in any form can be so damaging to your mental and emotional health. But here's the thing. Once you start to recognize these patterns, you can begin to take steps to protect yourself. And that's exactly what we're going to get into next. We'll talk about strategies for setting boundaries, avoiding power struggles, and maintaining your own emotional resilience in the face of narcissistic behavior. But first, it's important to understand that narcissism isn't just an individual issue. It's often a relational one. Narcissists need people around them to validate their sense of superiority. And this is where things get complicated. Because as someone close to a narcissist, you might find yourself caught in their web of manipulation. feeling like no matter what you do, it's never enough. So how do you break free from that? How do you maintain your sense of self when someone else constantly demands your attention and validation? That's what we're going to explore next. Practical, real-world strategies for managing these relationships in a way that protects your mental and emotional well-being. But first, of course, there's a brief word from our sponsor. This episode is sponsored by Athletic Greens. No, it's not at all, actually. It's sponsored by me and my book, which is out on Amazon, and you can purchase it as a paperback or on the Kindle, and it sits very much alongside this podcast. So if you're interested in philosophy and psychology and ways that these ideas can be applied to our lives in general, then the book is a really great place to get some theory and some practical applications of it. The premise of the book, we go through a few different scenarios. We talk about authenticity, about gratitude, about letting go of stuff. And there's a lot of stoicism, there's some Buddhism in there, there's all sorts of philosophy and theology that covers this stuff. And the end point of it is for you to be able to reflect upon yourself and whether you are living according to how you would want to live organically, or whether you've adopted all of these frameworks and ideas that come from the external. God knows there's enough of those that hit us every day. So if you're interested in the podcast, if you're interested in that sort of thing, some philosophy, some psychology, and some actual uses of them in day-to-day living, then go and buy my book on Amazon. You have to just search The Observing Eye, or I will put a link in the show notes for you to go and have a look at that as well. And I'm hoping that you will find it useful. So yeah, go buy my book. Subliminal messaging. Buy my book. You will buy it. Yeah, but just see what you think. Or don't. It's entirely up to you. There's no pressure. I have no expectation here. It is out into the world and I have let go of it. So it is just there. It exists. And you may enjoy it if you so choose. Thank you for your time. And we now return to the transmission. Now that we've unpacked what narcissism is and how it develops, let's talk about the real-world impact of living with a narcissist. Whether it's your partner, a family member, or even a boss or colleague, the emotional toll of these relationships can be profound. Narcissists have a unique way of distorting reality, and if you're close to one, you've likely felt the weight of their behavior in ways you might not have fully understood at first. So let's explore how this dynamic plays out and, most importantly, how it affects you. First, I want to address the emotional roller coaster that's often part of being in any kind of relationship with a narcissist. If you're living with or closely involved with one, you might feel like you're constantly on edge. One day they're charming, attentive, and even affectionate, making you feel like the most important person in the world. This is what's often referred to as love bombing. It's when they shower you with praise, affection, or even gifts in the early stages of the relationship, creating a sense of euphoria and deep connection. But then, seemingly out of nowhere, something shifts. The praise and affection disappear, replaced by criticism, manipulation, or outright hostility. You might find yourself walking on eggshells, trying to avoid conflict, or wondering what you did to trigger this sudden change. This cycle, where the narcissist idealizes you, devalues you, and then may discard you, is one of the hallmarks of narcissistic relationships. It's confusing and disorienting, and it can leave you questioning your own reality. One of the most damaging effects of living with a narcissist is the constant gaslighting. Now, gaslighting is a form of psychological manipulation where the narcissist makes you doubt your own memory, perception, or even sanity. They might deny things they've said or done, twist conversations to suit their narrative, or blame you for things that were clearly their fault. Over time, this can cause you to lose trust in yourself. You might find yourself second-guessing your every thought, or feeling like you're overreacting when in fact your reactions are completely valid. Let's take a closer look at how this plays out. Imagine you confront the narcissist about something hurtful they said. Instead of acknowledging your feelings or taking responsibility, they might respond with, "Well, I never said that," or "You're too sensitive, you're overreacting." Over time, that's my narcissist voice, by the way. Over time, you might start to believe them, thinking, well, maybe I am too sensitive. Maybe I did mishear them. This is classic gaslighting, and it can seriously damage your sense of self. This constant distortion of reality creates a feeling of helplessness. You might feel like no matter what you do, it's never enough, and worse, you can't even trust your own perceptions anymore. This is where the emotional exhaustion comes in. Dealing with a narcissist can leave you feeling drained, confused, and uncertain of your own value. Because narcissists have an almost insatiable need for attention and validation, they will often use up all of your emotional resources without giving anything back in return. It's like pouring all of your energy into a bottomless pit with no hope of ever feeling seen or heard. Another significant impact of living with a narcissist is the erosion of your self-esteem. Narcissists are masters of the subtle and not so subtle criticism. They may belittle your achievements, undermine your confidence, or compare you unfavorably to others. At first, you might brush off these comments, but over time they start to sink in. You begin to internalize their negative feedback and your self-esteem takes a serious hit. What's tricky here is that the narcissist criticism is often interspersed with moments of praise, which creates confusion. You start to think, well, they did say something nice last week, maybe I'm just imagining the bad parts. This push and pull dynamic keeps you hooked in the relationship, constantly trying to regain the narcissist's approval, which is never permanently given. Let's talk about control for a minute. Narcissists crave control, and they often achieve it through manipulation and blame shifting. For example, if you try to set a boundary, say you ask for some space or time to yourself, they might twist it around and accuse you of being selfish or uncaring. It's a classic move. Instead of respecting your boundary, they turn the situation around to make you feel guilty for even having a need in the first place. Over time, this undermines your ability to set healthy boundaries because you begin to fear the narcissist's reaction. You may start to question whether your needs are even valid. This pattern of blame shifting can make it feel like nothing is ever their fault. Narcissists are rarely able to take responsibility for their actions. Instead, they'll find a way to make you the problem. This constant shifting of blame is emotionally exhausting because it forces you to carry the weight of their issues on top of your own. You might find yourself apologizing for things you didn't even do just to keep the peace. Living with a narcissist can also feel incredibly isolating. Narcissists often alienate you from friends and family, either by demanding all of your attention or subtly sowing seeds of doubt about the people in your life. They may criticize your friends, making you feel guilty for wanting to spend time with them, or they'll play the victim, saying things like, "You care more about them than me." There's my narcissist voice again. This isolation is deliberate because it makes you more dependent on the narcissist for validation and emotional support, though of course they won't actually provide that support in any meaningful way. And then there's the unpredictability. Narcissists can be incredibly volatile. You might feel like you're constantly bracing yourself for the next blow up or mood swing. One minute everything is fine, and the next they're angry, blaming you for something completely out of your control. This unpredictability keeps you off balance and makes it difficult to find stability in the relationship. But let's pause for a moment here. As I'm describing these behaviors, if any of this resonates with you, I want you to know that these responses are normal. You're not imagining things. You're not being too sensitive or overreacting. Narcissists have a way of distorting reality, of making you feel like you're the problem, when in fact, their behavior is the issue. Recognizing this is the first step towards reclaiming your own sense of self and emotional well-being. So, if you've been nodding along as I've described the impact of living with a narcissist, you're not alone. This is a dynamic that plays out in so many relationships, and the damage it can cause is real. But the good news is, once you understand these patterns, you can start to protect yourself. You can set boundaries. You can begin to rebuild your self-esteem. And most importantly, you can take steps to regain control over your life. All right, we've explored the emotional toll that comes with living or being closely involved with a narcissist, the manipulation, the gaslighting, the erosion of self-esteem, and how it can leave you feeling drained and doubting your own reality. But now that we've named the problem, how do we manage it? What can we do to protect ourselves and maintain our emotional well-being while still interacting with a narcissist? Whether you're living with one, working with one, or trying to navigate a relationship with a narcissistic family member, there are strategies you can use to safeguard your mental health and reclaim your sense of self. The first and perhaps most crucial strategy is setting boundaries. Narcissists are notoriously bad at respecting boundaries. In fact, they often see boundaries as a personal affront, something that threatens their control or disrupts their constant need for attention and validation. But here's the thing. You absolutely need boundaries in these relationships. Without them, you'll be left emotionally exposed and vulnerable to their manipulations. So, what do boundaries look like in practice? It could be something as simple as saying, I can't talk about this right now, we'll revisit it later, or I need some time to myself today. Boundaries are about creating a safe space for yourself, a space where your needs are respected and your emotional energy is protected. The key is to be firm and consistent. A narcissist will likely test your boundaries, maybe even push harder when they realize you're serious about enforcing them. They might try to guilt you into bending or accuse you of being selfish or uncaring. Expect resistance, but don't waver. The more consistent you are in maintaining your boundaries, the more they'll start to understand that you're not going to play by their rules. Now, here's where things can get tricky: avoiding power struggles. Narcissists thrive on conflict. They often seek out drama or arguments because it gives them a sense of control. If they can provoke you into reacting emotionally, they've won in their mind. This is why it's so important to pick your battles carefully. Don't get drawn into every argument or feel the need to defend yourself at every turn. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply not engage. When you stay calm and composed, it takes the wind out of their sails. For example, let's say a narcissist starts criticizing you for something minor, like how you've handled a task at work or a small comment you made in passing. Instead of getting defensive or trying to explain yourself, you can simply say, I hear you, and leave it at that. By refusing to escalate the conflict, you deny them the emotional reaction they're seeking. You stay in control of your own emotions, and that's incredibly empowering. But of course, I know this can be easier said than done. Narcissists have a way of pushing your buttons, making you feel like you have to react, especially if they're twisting the truth or gaslighting you. This is where emotional detachment, or what people may call cognitive empathy, comes into play. Emotional detachment doesn't mean that you stop caring about the person, but it does mean that you stop emotionally investing in their opinions or reactions. Instead of letting their words or actions get under your skin, you step back and observe their behavior from a distance. Think of it like this. You become a bit like an outside observer, someone who sees the narcissist's behavior for what it is, a pattern, a predictable need for control and validation, rather than a personal attack on you. When you practice emotional detachment, you acknowledge that their behavior has less to do with you and more to do with their own insecurities and needs. You can even tell yourself, this isn't about me, when they start to criticize or manipulate you. Over time, this detachment allows you to stay grounded, even in the face of their most volatile behavior. Now, while you're practicing emotional detachment and avoiding conflict, it's also vital to focus on self-care and building emotional resilience. Dealing with a narcissist can take a toll on your mental health, so it's important to actively nurture yourself, whether through mindfulness practices, therapy, exercise, journaling, or spending time with supportive friends and family. One self-care practice I really want to emphasize here is taking time for yourself, especially if you're living with a narcissist. Narcissists tend to demand a lot of attention and emotional energy, and if you're not careful, you'll find yourself constantly catering to their needs at the expense of your own. Make sure to carve out time to do things that recharge you, whether it's meditation, reading, going for walks, or simply having quiet moments to yourself. And don't feel guilty about it. You are entitled to take care of yourself, and you don't owe anyone your time or emotional labor, especially not someone who is draining you. Now let's take a look at self-compassion for a moment. There's one that comes up a lot in these episodes. One of the hardest parts about being in a relationship with a narcissist is the self-doubt that creeps in over time. You'll start to wonder if you really are the problem, if you're overreacting, if you're somehow at fault for their behavior. This is where practicing self-compassion becomes so important. It's about reminding yourself that your feelings are valid, that your needs matter, and that you deserve to be treated with respect. When you're in the midst of dealing with a narcissist, it's easy to forget this because they're constantly undermining your self-worth. So take a moment. especially in those tough moments, to affirm your own value. Repeat to yourself, I deserve respect, my boundaries are valid, my needs are important. Another crucial strategy is to limit your emotional exposure to the narcissist. This means recognizing when you need to step back and create distance, whether that's emotional distance or in some cases physical distance. If you find that every interaction leaves you feeling drained or upset, it's okay to limit those interactions. You don't have to be constantly available. Sometimes reducing the amount of time you spend with a narcissist or communicating less frequently can give you the space that you need to recharge and regain perspective. And finally, one of the most empowering things that you can do is to seek external support. Dealing with a narcissist can feel incredibly isolating because they often try to cut you off from your support network. But reaching out to trusted friends, family, or a therapist can make all the difference. Sometimes just talking about what's going on with someone who understands can give you the clarity and strength you need to keep going. Therapy, in particular, can be an invaluable tool for helping you navigate the complexities of these relationships and for rebuilding your sense of self. So, let's recap that segment. We've talked about setting firm boundaries, avoiding power struggles, practicing emotional detachment, focusing on self-care, and seeking support. These strategies are all about reclaiming your emotional space and protecting your well-being when you're dealing with someone whose behavior can feel all-consuming. Remember, you don't have to play by their rules. You have the right to prioritize your own mental health, to set limits, and to protect your energy. In this segment, I want to take a slightly different approach to understanding narcissism and the way that it impacts us. We've talked a lot about the practical side of things, setting boundaries, managing conflict, protecting your mental health. But now, let's zoom out a little and take a look at narcissism from a more philosophical perspective. How does the narcissist behavior tie into larger ideas about the self, the ego, and our sense of identity? And how can practicing non-attachment, particularly from traditions like Buddhism, help us navigate these relationships with a deeper sense of peace and clarity? So let's start with the ego. When we talk about narcissism, at its core, we're talking about an extreme version of ego-driven behavior. The narcissist is constantly operating from a place of ego, where everything revolves around their sense of self-importance. But here's the thing. This inflated ego isn't as strong or secure as it appears. It's actually incredibly fragile. The narcissist needs constant validation, admiration, and control to maintain the illusion that they are superior, that they matter more than others. Without this constant feed of attention, the narcissist's ego starts to crumble, and they react with anger, defensiveness, or even cruelty. From a philosophical standpoint, the narcissist's attachment to their ego is almost like a prison. They are trapped in this endless cycle of needing to bolster their sense of self-worth because at the root of it, they are deeply insecure. And this is where we draw a parallel with spiritual and philosophical teachings, particularly in Eastern philosophies like Buddhism, where the ego is often seen as the root of suffering. In Buddhism, the ego, or what's sometimes called the small self, is considered an illusion. It's this idea that we are separate individual entities who need to protect and promote ourselves above all else. The teachings tell us that clinging to this sense of ego is what causes so much of our suffering. The more we cling to our identity, our status, and our self-importance, the more we become trapped in cycles of desire, fear, and dissatisfaction. Now, doesn't that sound a lot like the narcissist? They are perpetually stuck in the illusion that they are separate, that they need to control and dominate others to maintain their sense of self. But what's really going on underneath that bravado? Fear, insecurity, a profound discomfort with the idea that they might not be as important as they think they are. This is why they react so aggressively to even the slightest criticism or rejection, because it threatens to shatter their carefully constructed sense of self. So how do we respond to this as people who are close to narcissists? How can we deal with their ego-driven behavior without getting sucked into their drama tornado and control games? That's a trademarked phrase, by the way, drama tornado. That's one of mine. You're welcome to use it, though. I'm open sourcing it right now. Don't get sucked into the drama tornado. This is where the practice of non-attachment comes in. Non-attachment is a central teaching in many spiritual traditions, but it's particularly emphasized in Buddhism. It doesn't mean that we don't care about people or relationships. It means that we don't cling to outcomes, to ideas, or even to our own sense of self in a rigid way. In the context of dealing with a narcissist, practicing non-attachment means that we stop trying to control how they react to us, how they see us, or how they behave. It means letting go of the need for their validation or approval. We stop trying to fix them, stop trying to win their praise, and stop hoping that they will one day give us the empathy or recognition that we deserve. Instead, we focus on our own internal stability. Now, of course, that's easier said than done. When you're deeply involved with someone, especially if it's a close family member or a romantic partner, it's natural to want their approval or love. But the reality is, with narcissists, that kind of reciprocal, empathetic love may never come. They may never be able to give you what you need because they are so consumed with their own ego. But here's the liberating part of non-attachment. When you let go of needing anything from the narcissist, you free yourself. You stop riding that emotional roller coaster of hope and disappointment. You stop internalizing their manipulations, their criticisms, or their drama. Instead, you become centered in your own sense of self, not defined by how they see you or what they expect from you. So how do you practice non-attachment in a relationship with a narcissist? Well, it starts, as many things do, with self-awareness. Recognize when you're getting pulled into their web, whether it's through guilt, criticism, or manipulation. Ask yourself, what am I clinging to here? Am I trying to get them to see me a certain way? Am I hoping for validation that will never come? When you notice this, gently remind yourself to let go of that need. It's about shifting the focus away from trying to control their behavior or reactions, and instead focusing on your own inner self. One useful metaphor that I like comes from the Buddhist teachings on water and stone. Imagine the narcissist's ego-driven behavior as a heavy stone. Every time they criticize you, manipulate you, or try to control you, it's like they're throwing that stone at you, hoping it will make an impact. If you're clinging to their approval or getting caught up in their drama tornado, it's like you're standing there as a wall. Every stone hits you and you feel every impact. But if you practice non-attachment, as Bruce Lee famously said, it's like becoming water. The stone still gets thrown, but instead of hitting a wall, it just splashes into the water and sinks. The water absorbs the impact without being harmed by it. The narcissist will still behave the way that they do. That's not going to change. But when you stop being the wall and become like water, their actions no longer hit you with the same force. You remain centered, fluid, and unattached to their opinions or their need for control. Another key aspect of non-attachment is learning to let go of outcomes. Often, when we're in relationships with narcissists, we're constantly trying to get them to change, to behave differently, to finally get it. But the truth is, we can't control how they evolve, or if they ever will. Letting go of this attachment to outcomes means accepting the reality of who they are in the present moment, not holding on to the hope that they'll become the person that we want them to be. It's about shifting from, I need them to act this way for me to be happy, to, I can find peace and happiness regardless of how they act. This doesn't mean that you accept toxic behavior or let yourself be mistreated. That's very, very important to acknowledge. Non-attachment isn't passivity. It's about recognizing that your happiness and peace don't depend on someone else's behavior. So what's the takeaway here? The narcissist's ego is a fragile, ever-hungry force that will continue to seek validation and control, but you don't have to be a part of that dynamic. By practicing non-attachment, you create emotional distance between their behavior and your sense of self. You stop letting their actions define your worth or your peace of mind. Instead, you center yourself in your own internal sense of calm, not reliant on their approval or praise. You become like water, fluid, strong, and unshaken by their attempts to control or manipulate. In this segment, we're going to dive into one of the trickiest aspects of navigating life with a narcissist, the balance between empathy and enabling. If you've ever been close to a narcissist, you'll probably know how difficult it can be to show empathy without getting caught in their web of manipulation. You might find yourself constantly giving, constantly understanding, constantly trying to see things from their perspective, only to realize that your own needs and boundaries have fallen by the wayside. So how do you walk that fine line between being empathetic and being an enabler? How do you show compassion for someone who might genuinely be struggling with deep-seated insecurities and fears without allowing yourself to be drained, manipulated, or even mistreated in the process? Let's start with the concept of empathy. Empathy is one of the most beautiful qualities we can possess as human beings. It's the ability to understand and share the feelings of another person, to put ourselves in their shoes, and to connect on a deeper emotional level. For many of us, especially those of us who are naturally empathetic, this feels like the right thing to do in any relationship. We want to care, we want to help, and we want to support the people we love. But when it comes to narcissists, empathy can become a double-edged sword. Narcissists are often very good at eliciting empathy from others. They know how to play the victim, how to make you feel sorry for them, or how to present themselves as misunderstood or unfairly treated. And because they lack empathy themselves, they can easily exploit your empathy to manipulate you. This is where the danger lies, where your empathy becomes a tool for them to maintain control. Let me give you an example. Suppose you've set a boundary with a narcissist. Let's say you've told them that you need some time alone, or you've asked them not to speak to you in a certain way. Rather than respecting that boundary, the narcissist might respond by telling you how lonely they feel, how no one understands them, or how everyone is always abandoning them. Suddenly, you feel guilty. Your empathy kicks in, and instead of holding firm on your boundary, you start to comfort them, to reassure them, and maybe even to apologize for setting the boundary in the first place. And just like that, they've won. This is the key difference between empathy and enabling. Empathy is about understanding and caring for someone's feelings. Enabling, on the other hand, is when your empathy allows or encourages someone to continue harmful behavior, whether that's manipulation, disrespect, or emotional abuse. When you enable a narcissist, you inadvertently reinforce their toxic patterns because they learn that they can use your empathy to get what they want. So how do you show empathy without enabling? The first step is recognizing that empathy doesn't mean you have to fix everything for the narcissist. You can acknowledge their feelings without taking responsibility for them. This is a crucial distinction. A narcissist's emotional world can often be chaotic and overwhelming, but it is not your job to manage or soothe their emotions. Your job is to take care of your own emotional health, to protect your own boundaries, and to make sure that your empathy doesn't come at the expense of your well-being. For example, if a narcissist starts playing the victim and trying to make you feel guilty for setting a boundary, you can acknowledge their feelings without giving in. You might say something like, "I understand that you're feeling hurt or upset, but I still need to take this time for myself." Or, "I hear that you're going through a hard time, but my boundary remains the same." In doing this, you show empathy, you recognize their emotions, but you don't allow those emotions to override your own needs or boundaries. Another important aspect of avoiding enabling is learning to recognize when a narcissist is using your empathy to manipulate you. Narcissists are often skilled at turning situations around to make themselves the victim, even when they're clearly in the wrong. They might use phrases like, "You're the only one who ever understood me," or "I don't know what I..." Sorry, I didn't use my narcissist voice, did I? "You're the only one who ever understood me," or "I don't know what I'd do without you." So that's a bit more like fucking Darth Sidious. "Wipe them out, all of them," to make you feel indispensable or responsible for their well-being. I appreciate my narcissist voice changed, but I felt more like, as I'm doing this, as I'm reading through all of this stuff in the script, and I've had some dealings with narcissists myself, as I'm sure many of you have, I can't help but have this emotional reaction to my previous experiences and just thinking, those people, man, those fucking people. Yeah, I appreciate, I have empathy for and understand that narcissists are damaged individuals. But at the same time, that doesn't take away my experience and the emotional sort of shit that I've had to deal with in dealing with narcissists. So, I can on one hand have empathy, and on the other hand, honor and respect that I have had this experience and this is my response to it. So my kind of joking response to narcissists is to use the voice of Darth Sidious when they speak. There you are. That's my way. Okay, so let's carry on. I've sidetracked. Back to the script. These tactics are designed to pull you back into the relationship, to make you feel guilty or responsible for their emotions, and to keep you from asserting your boundaries. When you recognize these patterns, it becomes easier to resist the pull of enabling behavior. You can still be compassionate, but with the awareness that their emotions aren't your responsibility to fix. And I want to come back, of course, to self-compassion. I've mentioned it earlier, but I want to reinforce this idea because I think it's so important. It's so important to maintaining our own sense of wellness, basically. So it is an essential part of finding that balance between empathy and enabling. One of the biggest traps empathetic people fall into is neglecting their own needs while trying to care for others, especially when dealing with a narcissist. You might find yourself constantly giving, constantly forgiving, and constantly trying to keep the peace, even when it comes at a huge personal cost. Over time, this is obviously going to lead to things like burnout, resentment, and a loss of a sense of self. Now, when I say self-compassion, that word means, or that phrase, means treating yourself with the same kindness and care that you offer to others. It means recognizing when you need to step back, when you need to say no, and when you need to prioritize your own mental and emotional health. It's essentially giving yourself permission to put yourself first, especially in situations where someone is repeatedly taking advantage of your empathy. Now, here's a little way that you could practice self-compassion if you wanted. So whenever you feel conflicted about setting a boundary or saying no to a narcissist, I would ask you to ask yourself, if I were giving advice to a close friend in this situation, what would I tell them to do? Now, chances are you tell your friends to just run like fuck, or protect themselves and set healthy boundaries, and to not feel guilty about setting those boundaries. Now, the trick with self-compassion is to offer that same advice to yourself. It might feel uncomfortable at first, especially if you're used to putting others first, but over time, the practice will help you develop stronger self-compassion and reinforce your boundaries. So let's recap this segment. Empathy is a powerful and important quality, but when dealing with a narcissist, it can easily slip into enabling if we're not careful. The key is to go back to practicing that detached empathy, understanding the narcissist's feelings without taking responsibility for them, and to balance your compassion for them with compassion for yourself. Recognize when your empathy is being used to manipulate you, and don't be afraid to assert your boundaries, even if it feels uncomfortable. We've covered a lot so far. Understanding narcissism, the impact it can have on our mental health, setting boundaries, balancing empathy with self-protection. But one thing that makes navigating life with a narcissist particularly challenging is that narcissists can show up anywhere. Romantic relationships, family, the workplace, and each of these situations comes with its own unique difficulties. So in this segment, we're going to dive into how narcissism plays out in these different areas of life and what you can do to protect yourself in each of these specific scenarios. Let's start with one of the most emotionally charged areas, romantic relationships with a narcissist. If you've ever been romantically involved with a narcissist, you're likely familiar with what's often called the narcissistic cycle of idealization, devaluation, and discarding. I said that in first go. At the beginning of the relationship, the narcissist may seem like a dream come true. They'll shower you with affection, attention, and compliments, which is, that's that love bombing thing. During this idealization phase, it can feel like you've found the perfect partner. They seem to understand you on a deep level. They make you feel special, and they go out of their way to make you feel loved. But over time, that idealization begins to fade. I'm surprised it's been this long. We're at this point before I've started falling apart. The narcissist starts to criticize you, to put you down in subtle or not so subtle ways, to withdraw affection, or even to play mind games to keep you feeling off balance. This is the devaluation phase, where the narcissist begins to erode your self-esteem, making you feel like you're not enough, that you're the problem, or that you need to work harder to win back their love. This phase is emotionally exhausting because you're left constantly trying to regain the affection and approval that came so easily in the beginning. And then there's the final phase, the discard phase. This is when the narcissist may abruptly end the relationship or emotionally distance themselves in a way that feels sudden and cold. They may move on to another partner, leaving you wondering what went wrong or why you weren't enough. Or alternatively, they may hover, keeping you around but at a distance, never really letting you go, but also never fully committing to the relationship. So how do you protect yourself in a romantic relationship with a narcissist? Well, the first step is recognizing the cycle. Understand that the love bombing phase isn't real. It's a tactic to gain your trust and admiration. Once you see this pattern, you can begin to detach emotionally from the highs and lows of the relationship. Remember, it is not your fault that the narcissist has withdrawn or is devaluing you. Their behavior is about their own need for control and validation, not a reflection of your self-worth. The second step is setting and maintaining firm boundaries. You have every right to ask for respect, honesty, and consistency in your relationship. If the narcissist refuses to honor those boundaries, it's a sign that the relationship is unhealthy. While leaving a relationship with a narcissist can be difficult, especially if you've been subjected to manipulation and emotional abuse, it's often the best thing you can do for your own mental health. If you choose to stay, focus on protecting your emotional well-being by disengaging from their attempts to manipulate or control you. I will say something here. It is not my place to give advice, to tell you what you should be doing. But I'm going to. Well, I'm not. I'm going to say what I think, give you my opinion. If you're in a romantic relationship with a narcissist, if you recognize that you are in a romantic relationship with a narcissist, get out of it. Just go. It is not worth your well-being to remain in that. That's it. It's challenge. I appreciate that it is more complicated than that, and it is not as easy to do necessarily, but you're not going to fix them, and you're just going to be in an emotionally detached relationship, which to me is not the idea of a good relationship. So those are my thoughts. Take that as you will, but yeah, run like fuck, basically. Okay, let's shift. That is my opinion. I'm not giving. That's not like professional advice, obviously. Just from my own experiences and my thoughts on it, it is not worth the emotional damage that can be caused and the exhaustion, really. But anyway, right, let's move on. Let's move on to a different but equally challenging context, which is family dynamics. So dealing with a narcissistic family member, whether it's a parent, sibling, or even an adult child, can be incredibly difficult because there's often a deep sense of obligation or guilt that comes with family ties. Family narcissists tend to use these feelings of loyalty to maintain control over you, and because the relationship is more permanent, the stakes can feel even higher. For example, a narcissistic parent might have raised you with constant criticism or emotional manipulation, making you feel like you could never be enough. Even as an adult, they may continue to undermine your choices, demand your attention, or use guilt to control your actions. Similarly, a narcissistic sibling might compete with you for family approval, belittle your accomplishments, or create family drama to keep the spotlight on themselves. So how do you handle narcissistic family members? The key is learning to set emotional boundaries, which is often harder in family situations because of the guilt or obligation you might feel. One strategy is to limit your emotional exposure. You can still be part of the family, but you don't have to be drawn into every conflict, guilt trip, or drama tornado. Practice detachment by observing their behavior without getting sucked into the emotional dynamics that they're trying to create. It can also be helpful to limit the amount of time you spend with them or to avoid discussing sensitive topics that they might use to manipulate or criticize you. Another essential strategy is managing your expectations. Narcissistic family members, especially parents, are unlikely to change. If you keep hoping they'll suddenly become the supportive, loving parent or sibling you've always wanted, you will be disappointed permanently. Accepting them for who they are and letting go of the hope that they'll change, which is a depressing thought, but it can help you maintain your emotional stability. You don't have to cut them off completely, but you do need to protect yourself from their toxic behavior. In some cases, though, cutting ties may be the healthiest option, especially if the relationship is damaging to your mental health. And lastly, let's talk about the workplace, another common environment where you might encounter a narcissist. Dealing with a narcissistic boss or co-worker can be especially tricky because your livelihood might depend on keeping the peace. Narcissists in the workplace often engage in behaviors like taking credit for other people's work, blaming others for their own mistakes, creating unnecessary drama, and constantly seeking recognition. If your boss is a narcissist, they may expect constant praise and loyalty while offering little support or recognition in return. If it's a co-worker, they may try to undermine your success to make themselves look better, or they may dominate meetings, conversations, and projects in a way that's exhausting and frustrating. So, how do we deal with narcissists in the workplace? Again, first steps, managing your own expectations. Narcissistic bosses or co-workers will not change their behavior, so your goal isn't to change them, it's to protect your own sanity. One way to do this is by keeping clear documentation of your work. If your boss or co-worker is the type to take credit for what you've done, make sure there's a paper trail. Send emails summarizing meetings or assignments, document your contributions, and keep records of your achievements. This will protect you in case there's ever a question about who did what. Another strategy is to avoid unnecessary confrontation. Narcissists thrive on conflict, and they'll often bait you into arguments or power struggles. Instead of engaging, focus on remaining calm and professional. If a narcissistic co-worker is causing problems, address the situation directly but without emotional escalation. Stick to the facts, keep your tone neutral, and don't get drawn into their drama. If you're dealing with a narcissistic boss, one of the best things you can do is to set professional boundaries. While you may not have control over their behavior, you can control how you react. If they're constantly expecting you to be available outside of work hours, for example, you can politely but firmly push back. "I'll be happy to handle this first thing in the morning," can go a long way. And if the situation becomes unbearable, it's worth considering whether a transfer or even a job change might be necessary for your well-being. So to recap, whether you're dealing with a narcissist in a romantic relationship, within your family, or at work, the strategies we've discussed so far still apply. Setting firm boundaries, protecting your emotional space, and detaching from their attempts to manipulate you. Each of these environments has its own unique challenges, but the key is to prioritize your own well-being over their need for control. You can remain compassionate and professional without allowing yourself to be exploited or emotionally drained. As we enter into our final segment, I want to focus on finding the right support systems and exploring therapeutic approaches that can help you navigate your relationship with a narcissist. If you've been dealing with a narcissist for a long time, whether it's in a romantic, familial, or professional relationship, it is crucial to understand that you don't have to go through it alone. There are resources and tools out there designed to support you and to help you heal. Let's start with the importance of therapy. Dealing with a narcissist can be deeply confusing and emotionally draining, and it's easy to start questioning your own perspectives and feelings. Therapy can be an invaluable resource, not only for understanding what's happening to you, but also for rebuilding your self-esteem and emotional resilience. One of the most common types of therapy for this is Cognitive Behavioural Therapy, or CBT. CBT helps you recognize and reframe the negative thought patterns that often arise when you're dealing with a narcissist. For example, if you've been gaslighted by a narcissist for a long time, you may have internalized their criticisms or manipulations to the point where you doubt your own memory or judgment. A CBT therapist can help you identify these distorted thoughts and challenge them. Instead of automatically thinking, "I'm overreacting," or "maybe it's my fault," you can learn to pause and ask, "Is this really true? Am I responsible for their behavior, or is this a pattern of manipulation?" By learning to question these automatic thoughts, you can begin to break free from the mental traps that narcissists often set for those around them. Another therapeutic approach that can be very helpful in dealing with narcissists is Dialectical Behaviour Therapy, or DBT. DBT focuses on helping you regulate your emotions, tolerate distress, and develop healthier interpersonal relationships. If you've ever found yourself overwhelmed by the emotional roller coaster of being in a relationship with a narcissist, DBT can teach you practical skills to manage those intense emotions. One of the key components of DBT is mindfulness, which helps you stay grounded in the present moment rather than getting caught up in the narcissist drama or manipulation. Mindfulness is about observing your thoughts and feelings without judgment. I feel like I say that every episode. So hopefully that you know what mindfulness is by now if you've been listening regularly. But for those of you who don't, it is recognizing them for what they are, but not letting them control your actions. For example, when a narcissist is trying to provoke a reaction from you, mindfulness can help you pause, take a step back, and respond in a way that aligns with your values rather than reacting impulsively. It's about learning to stay calm in the storm, even when the narcissist is trying to stir things up. DBT also includes techniques for setting and maintaining boundaries in difficult relationships. Narcissists are exceptionally skilled at pushing boundaries and creating chaos, so having a toolkit of DBT skills can help you stay firm without getting overwhelmed. For instance, DBT teaches interpersonal effectiveness, which helps you communicate your needs clearly and assertively while still maintaining respect for yourself and others. This can be incredibly empowering when you're dealing with someone who constantly tries to undermine your confidence or manipulate your emotions. Family therapy can also be useful in certain situations, especially if you're dealing with a narcissistic parent or sibling. In some cases, and I caveat that with in some cases, it can provide a structured environment where everyone can express their feelings openly and where unhealthy patterns can be identified and addressed. However, family therapy with a narcissist can be tricky because narcissists are often, as I'm sure some of you have found, are often unwilling or unable to acknowledge their own behavior. They won't even go to therapy, basically. Because, there's nothing wrong with them, right? It's all your fault. You're the problem. They're not the problem. Why do they need therapy? In these situations, therapy might be more about helping you and other family members set boundaries and protect yourselves rather than changing the narcissist's behavior. If you're in a romantic relationship with a narcissist, couples therapy might seem like a good option, and it can sometimes be helpful, but, another caveat, they're very resistant to taking responsibility, and they might just use the therapy as another arena in which to manipulate or gaslight you. If you do pursue couples therapy, it's important to work with a therapist who understands narcissistic personality traits and can see through the narcissist's potential attempts to control the narrative. In many cases, individual therapy may be a better option for you to work on healing and making decisions about the relationship from a place of strength. And if any of you have attempted any sort of therapy with a narcissist, I'm sure you can relate to that, how they will, or mediation or anything like that, how the narcissist will dominate the narrative and everything will be twisted and you will be the villain and they will be the hero in their own fucked narrative, basically. In addition to therapy, support groups can be incredibly helpful when you're dealing with a narcissist. Sometimes just knowing that other people are going through the same thing that you are can provide immense relief. Support groups, whether in person or online, offer a space where you can share your experiences, hear from others who face similar challenges, and receive some practical advice. These groups can also help reduce the sense of isolation that often comes with being in a relationship with a narcissist, especially since narcissists are skilled at making you feel like no one else could understand your situation. There are also some pretty good books written by psychologists and survivors of narcissistic abuse that might help you understand what you're going through and give you some practical strategies for protecting yourself. A few well-respected books include The Narcissist You Know by Joseph Burgo, Will I Ever Be Good Enough by Dr. Carol McBride, which focuses specifically on daughters of narcissistic mothers, and Disarming the Narcissist by Wendy Bihari, which offers strategies for dealing with narcissists without losing yourself. Self-care is another critical piece of the puzzle. When you're dealing with a narcissist, it's easy to lose sight of your own needs because you're so focused on managing their behavior or keeping the peace. But self-care isn't just a luxury, it's a necessity. This can include simple daily practices like making time for activities you enjoy, engaging in mindfulness or meditation, journaling your thoughts and emotions, or simply making sure you get enough rest and nourishment. Remember that taking care of yourself is not selfish. It is essential for your well-being, especially when you're dealing with a draining and manipulative relationship. Finally, if the relationship with the narcissist in your life is particularly toxic or abusive, it may be worth exploring legal or protective measures. If you're experiencing emotional, verbal, or physical abuse, do not hesitate to reach out to a domestic violence hotline or any sort of legal legal support to discuss your options. Narcissists can sometimes escalate their behavior when they feel like they're losing control. So having a plan in place to protect yourself is crucial if the situation feels unsafe. That's my serious voice. So to recap this final segment, therapy, particularly CBT and DBT, can be incredibly helpful for understanding and managing your relationship with a narcissist, as well as for rebuilding your self-esteem and emotional resilience. Support groups and online communities can provide a sense of solidarity and understanding, while there are some pretty good books that offer some further insights and strategies. And of course, self-care is vital. Don't lose sight of your own needs in the process of dealing with a narcissist. If the relationship becomes unsafe or abusive, do not hesitate to reach out for legal protection. And, therapy, might work, but generally, if I say therapy, couples therapy with the narcissist present in the room, hit and miss. So don't rely on that too much to resolve the issues. Navigating life with a narcissist is no easy task, but remember that you are not alone in this journey. There are people, tools, resources available to help you find clarity, strength, and rebuild your sense of self. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is all I have to say on the subject of narcissists and how to cope with them. We've gone through quite a bit this episode, from understanding narcissism and the emotional toll it takes, to setting boundaries, managing empathy, and finding support through therapy and community. I hope that throughout this episode you've gained not just some insights, but perhaps a sense of empowerment if you're going through that stuff, knowing that while living with or dealing with a narcissist is incredibly challenging, there are tools and strategies that can help you protect your emotional well-being and regain some control over your life. One of the most important takeaways that I want to leave you with is this. You are not responsible for fixing the narcissist. No matter how much empathy or compassion you show, the behavior of a narcissist is beyond your control. What you can control is how you respond, how you protect yourself, and how you choose to engage or disengage from the relationship. Setting boundaries, practicing emotional detachment, and prioritizing self-care are essential steps in reclaiming your sense of self-worth. If there's one message that I hope resonated with you today, it's that your feelings are valid. If you've been questioning your own reality, doubting your self-worth, or feeling overwhelmed by the narcissist's manipulation, remember that you are not alone in this experience. Narcissists have a way of making us feel isolated, but there are millions of people who understand exactly what you're going through. Reaching out for support, whether through therapy, support groups, or trusted friends, can make all the difference in helping you heal and move forwards. Before we wrap up, I want to touch on a point that we discussed earlier, and that's self-compassion. It is easy to get caught up in self-blame, thinking that you could have done more, should have set boundaries earlier, or shouldn't have let things get this far. But the truth is, dealing with a narcissist is incredibly complex, and it's important to show yourself kindness. You're doing the best you can in a difficult situation, and every step you take toward protecting your mental health is progress. Healing is not linear. It is a tumultuous journey, and it is okay to take one step at a time. Moving forward, I encourage you to keep reflecting on the strategies that we've talked about today. Whether it's setting firmer boundaries, practicing non-attachment, or seeking out professional help, these tools can help you build emotional resilience and gain some clarity in your relationship with the narcissist. If you're feeling overwhelmed, remember to start small, maybe by identifying just one boundary you can set or one self-care practice you can introduce into your daily routine. Little by little, these changes can lead to big shifts in how you relate to the narcissist and, more importantly, how you relate to yourself. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey today. I know this has been a heavy topic, but it is one that so many people face, and it is important to bring these conversations into the open. Remember that the journey toward healing and self-care is a process, and that you are taking an important step just by being here, by listening, and by reflecting on how you can move forward. And if you found this episode useful or you enjoyed it in some way, please consider subscribing to the podcast. Leave it a review or share it with others who might find it interesting. Your support helps us to continue to bring you this sort of content, and it helps us to understand what sort of content you want to listen to. Because if I put an episode out there on green bean farming and nobody likes it, then I shan't do any more episodes about green bean farming. And likewise, if everybody likes this one, then I'll do more stuff about this. You can help guide the content we create by using your voice. He's using the voice. As always, if anything in this episode has resonated with you in any way, then I would love to hear from you. You can share your stories via Patreon at patreon.com/theobservingeye or on social media. You can find us on YouTube at youtube.com/@theobservingeye and on TikTok and Instagram with the handle @theobservingeye as well. Take care, everybody. Much love, and I'll catch you soon.
You've been listening to The Observing Eye. Thanks for spending some time with me today. I hope it's been useful. And if you're interested in any more of my writing or work around psychology, philosophy, and general day-to-day living, please go and take a look at my Substack, which is theobservingeye.com. And that's I as in the letter, not I as in the gelatinous organ through which you see. Take care, everybody. Much love, and I'll catch you soon.